In the international school community, hellos and goodbyes are common. The beginning of the school year is electric with nerves as new students and new teachers find their place in the school community. The end of the year is fraught with emotion as the community says goodbye to the friends and colleagues who are moving on. Transitions are a normal aspect of life, particularly in the context of international schools. For my final project, I revamped a transitions unit for my 11th and 12th grade Learning Strategies class. The unit addressed both the GIS High School Learning Support Standards and several of the ISTE standards for students. At the start of the unit, several tools were established as the primary resources for the unit. Google Classroom. Our Learning Strats 11-12 Google Classroom would serve as the platform for communication and resource sharing throughout the unit. Reflection platform. Each student chose a digital platform to record their personal reflections throughout the unit. They were free to choose the type of platform as long as it allowed for digital sharing and commenting. Some chose a blog they had created for another purpose, and others created a Google Doc that they shared with the class. Social media. Students were informed that social media would play a large role in the unit. No student was required to create an account for an application they did not already have, but they were invited to begin thinking about ways to connect with people outside the school community. Devices. Students were free to use their school-issued laptop, classroom iPads, or personal devices such as phones throughout the unit as appropriate. As you can see, students were given a great deal of choice throughout the unit. Since the students in this class were in grades 11 and 12, many preparing for graduation and independence, it was important to provide individual choice within the overall structure of the unit. The unit was introduced during the first lesson of the new semester. Since most students were seniors, we took time to share hopes, dreams, fears, and anxieties about the last semester of high school. Using high school graduation as an initial example, we talked about the concept of transitions on a broad level. The class brainstormed different types of transitions and shared examples from their own lives as we looked ahead to the goals of the upcoming unit. The next step was to interview members of our school community to hear personal stories and experiences related to major life transitions. Based on their initial discussions, the class identified two main categories of people: those who recently experienced a major transition and those preparing for a major transition. The class brainstormed questions that pertain to each category. With a partner, students interviewed two members of the GIS community, one representing each category of transition. Through their interviews with classmates, teachers, and counselors, they gained a new perspective on the two sides of transitions. As they shared their learning, they identified transitions-related themes that were common across the interviews. The interviews help students develop a greater understanding of transitions and recognize that there is more than one side to a transition. The next step was to connect these observations to research. The next lesson opened with partners reading the poem Moving by Barbara Shaetti. Students identified connections to their past and upcoming experiences. Next, students explored the stages of transition through an activity based on David Pollock's transition model. Each group received a set of cards with the task of sorting them according to the stages of transition. As groups compared the order they chose, they came to a common understanding of the general phases most people experience during a time of transition. As a class, we reviewed Pollock's transition model through the student-friendly interpretation prepared by Cheryl Murray at Global Transitions. Now that they had a common vocabulary to identify the stages of transition, they returned to the poem and identified the stages that were reflected in the poet's experience. Before students began delving deeper into their personal transition, they worked together to create a mind map to represent the general elements of transitions. As a class, they chose words that made the most sense to them for each stage and discussed the important aspects of each stage. Now it was time for students to focus more intensely on an upcoming transition in their own life. This started with students reflecting on an upcoming transition and using the same program to create a mind map that represented their upcoming transition. Most seniors reflected on the upcoming transition from high school to university, but our only grade 11 student used the opportunity to prepare for the transition to senior year. From this point on, students entered the heart of the unit. This stage broke down the walls of the classroom and enabled students to engage with their upcoming transition virtually. Since most students were seniors preparing for a transition to a place that is unknown and unfamiliar, this process allowed them to learn about and experience their transition destination virtually before making the big leap. Although the process looked different for each student based on their individual transition, each student conducted research and used social media to connect with resources outside the GIST community to prepare for their transition.
I am interviewing a friend who is outside of GIST. His name's Jerome. He is a college student for the second year in UPH, and I'm interviewing him about how is it like to transition from high school to college in another country. And the reason why I picked him is because he knows my college and he did experience this transition. Okay. I sent him a message on Facebook and I thought he was going to respond later in the afternoon, but suddenly he responded immediately, which really excited me. So since I have the answers already, I can put it on the Google Drive.
I'm just emailing a former GIST student who is currently in college overseas about her transitions into college.
The first initial move is hard because you're not used to the things that are there, but as time progresses, it becomes easier and becomes a way of life. And she also taught me that it's a new challenge from the way that high school is viewed. There is more priority. You have your own priorities and you have to go through the things that you have to do. It's not your parents doing it anymore, it's you. And that really struck me because I never thought about that before.
Since I'm the only one who's not graduating this year, I've been researching for summer programs in this transition unit so I could prepare for my transition in 12th grade, and I can also prepare for my transition in 2017, which is college.
As the unit wrapped up, students were asked to consolidate their learning from the past few weeks to create one final product. Their task was to develop a digital resource that counselors could share during transition meetings with students graduating or moving to another international school. The digital product had to incorporate their learning from the unit, reflect elements of visual literacy, and give credit for any images or sources that were not their own. The learning from this unit could be very beneficial for our guidance counselors in their work with transitioning students. Rather than sharing the unit overview and outcomes from my perspective, the counselors will hear directly from the students. Each student will schedule a meeting with his or her counselor to share their learning and their guidelines for successful transitions. Once the students have completed their meetings, I will follow up with the counselors during a department meeting and seek opportunities to learn from each other as we support students through the transition process. Although there were many important lessons learned over the course of this unit, two major themes stood out. The importance of choice. By allowing for a great deal of choice throughout the unit, I gained a better understanding of how my students learn and engage with their work. Whether it was the type of social media used, the different ways they represented the stages visually, or where they sat in the classroom, each activity highlighted the various approaches and preferences that were represented in just my small class. I recognize that there are many situations in education where choice is not possible. However, this unit reminded me of the power of giving students the opportunity to demonstrate their learning in their unique way. Learning beyond the classroom. This unit gave my students the opportunity to engage in learning that wouldn't have been possible without technology. As international students, transitions often require a leap into the unknown. Many students move to a new school or country they have never experienced in person. Through social media and the World Wide Web, students were able to interact with their upcoming transition virtually, taking their learning to a new level. As educators, we can and should be using technology to redefine how our students learn.